Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very grateful to you and all the participants in the discussions today for the general support to the approach of mine given in my report. I would just try to concentrate on a few issues which I think would clarify my approach, and whatever reservations some of the participants may have should be addressed by that. My main motivation is based on a very simple proposition that poverty has been recognized as a scourge, as a gross deprivation of human dignity and misery for a long period. But still, poverty persists, and I believe a human rights approach would make it possible to eradicate poverty. For that, first, there has to be a social consensus to accept the obligation of adopting and implementing policies. Removing poverty is feasible. Technology and resources exist in most developing countries and definitely in the world economy. What is lacking is political will. Governments have many objectives to be fulfilled with their existing resources. If an objective is accepted as a human right, that objective trumps over others and must be fulfilled with highest priority. This applies to nation states and the international community, which recognize the objective as a human right. Secondly, to be accepted as a human right, the objective must appeal to the conscience and moral value of most people in a society to accept the obligations. Removing poverty is one such objective. Removing extreme form of this poverty would be an even more appealing objective for an even greater moral value. But realizing the problem should be manageable, since obligations involve some reallocation of resources. There would be political lobbies and interest groups opposed to a large redistribution of resources. For this reason, we have invoked this notion of extreme poverty. It builds on the international consensus of multidimensionality of poverty. Extreme poverty as the union of people suffering from extreme forms of income poverty, lack of human development and social exclusion not only increases the moral appeal of the objective, but also concentrates on a smaller proportion of the total poor population, making the problem much more manageable. Third, to accept the notion that extreme poverty is a denial of human rights, so that a social state without extreme poverty as a human rights entitlement is of great importance. The obligation will be to adopt and implement policies, at least the minimal policies to fulfill the basic rights from among the civil and political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. As a program of coordinated measures, the debate on whether extreme poverty is a violation of human rights or a condition caused by denial of human rights is not a matter of logic, Mr. President, but it is an issue of society accepting eradicating extreme poverty as a human right norm or entitlement. It is a matter of social contract, like the American Declaration of Independence, which claimed that fulfilling certain basic rights is the ground of legitimacy of a government, which can be overthrown if the right is not fulfilled. The world should accept the abolition of extreme poverty as a universal obligation, similar to the objective of abolition of slavery. This issue has been often misunderstood because of a confusion about the notion of violation, because in most cases the culpability of the duty bearer non-fulfilling the obligations cannot be sustained and therefore not justiciable. A human rights obligation has to be binding on duty bearers who can help to fulfill an objective, whether the duty bearer is a national authority or the international community. Only when a duty bearer has a perfect obligation, I invoke this concept which was associated with Kant, but in this particular case quite legitimate, that perfect obligation of performing a duty that directly affects or contributes to the fulfillment of the objective. The non-performance of the duty may result in the increase in extreme poverty and therefore can be regarded as a violation of human rights. That violation need not be settled always in a court of law. There can be mechanisms to settle the problem through concrete actions and compensatory programs. Appeal to the court of law would be a last resort, and that also when the direct responsibility of a specific duty bearer can be established. This is particularly relevant for the international community. Mr. President, once eradicating poverty is accepted internationally as a human rights obligation, the international community has an imperfect obligation. When the effectiveness of most of their actions are indirect, contingent upon the action of others, especially the national authorities. For example, freeing trade by removing subsidies of richer countries would improve the exports and revenue of the countries affected. But it can increase the incomes of the poor only if the increased revenues can be redistributed by national policies. As such, they cannot be regarded as violation. However, and this is most important, if the national authorities adopt appropriate policies, the imperfect obligation can be converted into a perfect obligation, and the international community would be responsible for violation unless a consensual mechanism of coordinated mutual cooperation, international cooperation, to adopt corrective policies fail to work. The idea is to accept the best efforts to be made to fulfill the human rights as a binding obligation. The point is that abolition of extreme poverty is now possible, Mr. Chairman, for all countries in the world, especially with the active role played by the international community. A number of countries, even within their meager resources, have gone a long way to solve the problems. Bangladesh, Brazil, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and if I may mention my own country, India. The German authorities made a very interesting point about the involvement of the civil society. That is an essential element of the human rights approach, and in my report I have repeatedly talked about that very carefully. And therefore the question of PRSP, which I have talked about here, clearly shows where the participation has failed and where the participation can be improved. In my other reports, my next reports, I shall elaborate on these issues very carefully. The guidelines that have been referred here are the best example how it can be done internationally. What is needed now is that the guidelines, or at least some of the minimal elements of the guideline, are accepted as binding international obligation. Mr. President, this is what we shall be able to make if the world accepts this, and I appeal to that, and that's what I have tried through my reports, sociologically and also actual demonstration of the country examples. I have given examples of Asia, Africa, I can give examples of Latin America, I can give examples of several other countries in Europe, which has a different kind of poverty problem, but still a poverty problem affecting the human dignity. They can all be solved. And if we are determined to solve them, we can abolish extreme poverty the same way we had abolished slavery.